coming round solid land. Fields of grass and snow, fields of grass and snow. As the day comes and goes, we will walk hand in hand. We will walk hand in hand.
I just gave this piece a bath last night in the solution that I made of with some watercolor, some phthalo sanding, gummy arabic, and some white. Started with a base of really dark blue pastel, and then fixed it several times and used ink, and then took dirt and copper and vibrated it into place, playing Amazing Grace on my bass and running that through the painting, and then this is the composition that formed. Contemporary painter Makoto Fujimura asked what he calls the 500-year question. What is the 500-year question? Well, it's a long-term historical look at the reality of our cultures that asks what ideas, what art, what vision in our current culture has the capacity to affect humanity for more than 500 years. It's the opposite of the Warholian 15 minutes of fame. If our decisions matter and make ripple effects in the world, then should we not weigh what we say and do in light of the 500-year question? So I just went ahead and did a modification to this piece. I've had a lot more failures than successes, but this has proven to be a really good method of getting a vibration into the canvas. It turns out that capturing sound waves is not an easy thing to do, because as soon as the sound stops, the structure wants to break down immediately. When the boundary conditions of the sound waves aren't holding the material together, there's nothing there except just gravity and traces of what was. So that's why I call these sound fossils. When the sound stops, the life is gone. And there have been a lot more failures than successful captures. Many more. I would say 12 or 20 excellent compositions come and go before I have one that I'm able to catch part of. But even the process of trying to capture it, it wants to start to break down, it wants to erode. So really, these are a lot like fossils. Look at this ink.
I'm using this Chinese ink. It was intended for Chinese brush painting. Pretty cool stuff. It's a simple formula, just gelatin and carbon. And well, I live in Asia. I guess I'm just gonna salt everywhere. Here we go. And so the salt's got to do its job and suck that paint in. So the paint's got to be wet enough that it can do that. I haven't seen it in 3 days, so let's see what it looks like. There's this idea from modern art that the message is in the materials, and for me the choice to use copper was kind of twofold. Copper, of course, is not an enduring metal. It's not like gold. Copper decomposes, it oxidizes, it changes color, it breaks down, just like the materials that we're made of. It's an earthly material. And so that on its own has some significance. And its process of breaking down, I think, is very beautiful. There's a New Testament story. Jesus was at the temple with some of his students, and he saw people coming and bringing their offerings, and contrasted with all the rich, lavish offerings that people were bringing, expensive materials and incredible stones and things that were built and put into the temple. There was a widow that came, and she had 2 copper coins, together worth about a penny. Really nothing. And Jesus noticed her. And he said that what she gave was more valuable than all the others put together, because she gave all she had. I think about how many billions of people have heard of those 2 copper coins in the past 2,000 years of people alive today have been inspired to acts of generosity because of this one woman's act of giving. And she probably didn't even know that Jesus was watching.
In many ways, this investigation is a break from what I have been doing, at least visually. Much of what I've done in the past has been symbolic or representational. A lot of attention to the mechanics of images, form, shadow, cast shadow, illusion of depth, and so on. Realism, or at least surrealism, speaking of the spiritual. In many ways, this new work is still similar. There have always been Christian themes in my work, biblical themes. The turn comes in that with these new paintings, there is an emphasis on the material. In the past, I was attempting to talk about spiritual themes like love, or temptation, or grace, or forgiveness, thanksgiving, invisible themes. I was trying to make the invisible visible. That's why I called them spiritual realism. In these new paintings, the message is the materials and the method. These paintings were spoken into existence, and that is what they are about. I've always wanted my process to be visible on the surface. I want the audience to see that. I like it when a brush leaves brush strokes. I like it when I can marvel at the skill of a drawing, but I like to see that it has been drawn, that it is a drawing. But these new paintings are non-representational, at least in as far as that they are not one thing that stands for another. They are what they are, compositions created when sound waves move on material. They don't represent that. They are that.
The fact that these paintings are non-representational and very surface level, no illusions of depth in there. It's different. It's visually very different. Yeah, some of my pieces from the past have been trying to talk about heaven, trying to talk about it in a very earthly, physical way, trying to talk about spiritual things, trying to talk about that kingdom which is at hand, which is beyond the material, and also visible through the material. In that way, that's still what I'm doing. And I get there by way of science and theology. It kind of started with a conversation, or trying to have a conversation with my grandpa.
My grandpa held to a strong set of scientific evolutionary beliefs about the origin of man. Somehow he'd been taught that the belief in a creator God and belief in evolutionary theories were somehow mutually exclusive. So I wanted to have this conversation.
About God, about theological things, and he had a strong sense of that there was some sort of a barrier in having evolutionary thoughts. He had a strong sense that this world evolved, that life evolved, and I want to have a conversation about how that doesn't. Those theories, they don't negate the possibility of a creative God doing that. He had a major stroke, so his vocabulary was limited, and conversation with him was limited, but he was a genius.
International businessman, inventor, loving husband to my grandma.
And I knew that he could understand things visually, so I wanted to paint some things that would have that conversation.
And so this began my artistic inquiry into theories of theistic evolution.
And after viewing them, he said the longest sentence I can remember he ever said. He said, "I know exactly what you mean." I think actually modern art has really been influenced by the pragmatism of science. Science isn't into something you can't hold, something you can't touch, and I feel like modern art, contemporary art, it's following in that kind of pragmatism. It's show it to me. Don't tell me about it. Don't don't ask me to use my imagination about it. Just put it in front of me. Put me in front of it, or even collapse that distance.
But the funny thing is, when you collapse that distance, you include me in that distance. Art can no longer stand between me and what's beyond. I'm a part of it, surrounded by the sublime. And the realization that one is a creature, a created thing. In the beginning was the Word. God spoke, and everything took shape. So I think it's the method of painting in which my works can be considered in the Christian sublime. That I'm not representing that. I'm attempting to, and with very rough results, create using the same technique. I wanted to keep investigating theistic theories of evolution, and I found that there is a large body of scientists and theologians and historians working on reconciling some of the special problems of this field. Questions about matching the timeline in Genesis to fossil records, and if there could have been physical death predating the spiritual death brought about by sin. If there's room in Scripture for evolutionary biological process to be a mechanism through which God sovereignly formed living things. It turns out that there were Christian writers like Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s and painters like Hieronymus Bosch in the 1400s with thinking along these lines, predating Charles Darwin by 400 years or more. There's a group of scientists working on something called the Randomness Project, and they're trying to mathematically map randomness, and show that if you put boundary conditions on the randomness, you can actually drive that randomness towards a desired end. They're actually trying to show that God can work through randomness to produce a desired end. Yeah, I feel like these paintings I'm working on demonstrate that without numbers. More interesting to me, and a surprising link between this and my current body of work, keeping it within contemporary movements in painting, are questions about the mechanism of randomness and of determination, authorial intention, creativity, questions like that. I look at the action paintings of Jackson Pollock, seemingly random, and yet we see traces of a hand at work. A lot of my initial works had a lot of symmetry, basically sketches after Ernst Chladni. And I was photographing them, whether they were in water or sand or combinations of both, capturing the momentary compositions. But eventually I wanted to move away from photography and capture the actual materials that were being shaped. As I continued to work, my pieces moved from a place of great symmetrical balance to asymmetrical balance, and towards a kind of sublime abstract expression that is beyond my rational comprehension. I began to see and permit, on a larger scale, the enormous randomness that had been secretly hidden inside of the precise compositions, the small symmetry of earlier works. I lengthened the boundary conditions as I began to see the creative process as participatory and safely under an understanding that's much bigger than mine. Chesterton observed that an orange is round enough to get itself called round, though actually it's not. That upon looking at a human, one would assume that he is symmetrical, and that it would be irrational to assume that the heart would be on one side and not also on the other. It's precisely this kind of beyond rational intuition that my works ultimately follow. The elements of randomness and working from a distance, not touching the canvases, things like that, have limited my control to the boundary conditions of sound. Working with the physics of sound, I had some control over my material, but working with uneven surfaces and a variety of materials, there is a certain amount of unpredictability as well. Can we have it both ways? Can we have randomness and control? Can we have indeterminate processes and purpose? Can we have intention and an openness to interpretation? I'm working on tying up the loose ends of several traditions, including the historical church, the gallery and museum art world tradition, leading to modern contemporary avant-garde art, and the scientific legacy. Of course, I can't help but view the world through my relationship with Christ. But I believe that this phenomenon of sound, with its source, its implications, is big enough, sublime enough to entertain and also contain any number of interpretations and experiences. I hope that my art will provide an opportunity for that. The decision not to touch my canvases with a brush or with my hand or a knife, it was necessary for this to work. Yeah, in the end, a lot of the compositions really did work out a lot like I had hoped. There were also some surprises, some things I couldn't have predicted. My authority as an artist was intentionally placed in question. I limited myself so that I could visualize this. I guess it's something like giving my paintings a bit of their own free will. There were some things that surprised me. It was a lot of fun.
common ground, solid land. Fields of grass and snow, fields of grass and snow. As the day comes and goes, we will walk hand in hand.